Hey everyone, right now we got Julian here, getting first place in our Final Fantasy tournament. Walk us through your winning deck. Yeah.
For sure. All right, so today I was playing a Final Fantasy VII Ice Wind build. So starting us off, first card I play is Locke. He's my main card. So Locke, his main ability is for every card you play or cast, his cost is reduced. So typically I like to play like 2 to 3 cards to get his cost down to about 4. And when he enters the field, he dull and freezes 2 characters and either makes them discard, break a monster, or break a character of cost 6 or more. Um, so currently, right now, a lot of people are trying to be really aggressive. So by being aggressive as well, by playing a bunch of things and then dulling and freezing their limited resources, it becomes really oppressive as the game continues to go on. So since the goal is to play Locke as cheap as you can, I play 3 copies of Riku. So Riku's ability is she has 2 abilities. When she enters the field, you can choose to activate 2 characters or dull one of your opponent's characters. So essentially, since she costs 2 and you can activate 2, she's free. But that is also lowering the cost of Locke. So together they are very good. Moving on, I play 2 of Cloud. So Cloud is my light card of choice for this deck. Cloud searches for any Final Fantasy VII character within my deck, and then his second effect is I can pay 3 CP to choose one forward and break it. And at damage 5, he becomes a 9k body. So essentially, he is a 2 cost since he searches for a card, and then he has removal in case it's needed at the end of the game. So since he searches for any 7 character, my 7 characters I play are 2 Yuffie. So Yuffie is a cheap body who gains haste if there are 3 or more 7 characters on the field. I'll get to the rest of the 7 characters in a bit. Mostly she's just there to have haste to close out a game if needed. I play 2 Kate Sith. Kate Sith, he's a 2 cost backup that allows me to look at my opponent's hand, and then I can choose one non-backup in their hand and remove it from the game. So he works really well with Locke and the rest of the deck because I'm mostly dulling and freezing your characters. So usually my opponent will want to search for a card that they need to remove the threat, but because their resources are tapped, they hold on to it until the next turn. And then I drop the Kate Sith to remove it from game from their hand, and then it kind of limits them on what they can do next. Continuing on the 7 train, I play 3 Aerith. So Aerith, she is a 3 cost backup that activates 3 backups. So if she is the fourth or 5th card that I play, she's essentially free. And that also would lower the cost of Locke being played. And then she has a special ability where if I pitch a card named Aerith, I can activate all my forwards and make them not targetable by spells or summons or abilities. So usually, when my opponent's like gonna pitch their whole hand to get rid of Locke or Cloud, I'll just pitch a Aerith to make them untargetable. But at that point, they've got rid of all the cards in their hand.
This was one of the staples back in the days when Opus 1 came out.
Yes. And you can search all of these off of Cloud, and having this on the field does reduce or makes Yuffie gain haste. So the next part of the 7 package, I play the Remnant package, which is 3 Kadaj, 3 Yazoo, and 2 Laz. So these are probably the most oppressive cards with Locke, I would say. So starting with Kadaj. So Kadaj is a 4-cost category 7 forward who has 2 main abilities. He searches for a job remnant other than himself. So that's either Laz or Yazoo. And whenever a remnant enters the field, you can freeze a character. So usually you play him, you search for a card, and then you freeze something. I usually like to play him turn 1 or turn 2. If my opponent goes first and they usually play a backup, I will play him, freeze their backup, and then search for one of the other 2. And then I can either play it that turn if they played 2 backups to freeze their other, or drop the next turn and then keep their backups frozen. So when Yazoo enters the field, he dulls a character, and then if Kadaj on the field, it's frozen as well. So he's really good. And then I like to use him offensively and defensively because your opponent usually doesn't want to block him because when he dies, he dull and freezes the character when he dies. So, your opponent has like that one last blocker and they don't want it to tap, so they'll just allow the point of damage even though they could easily kill him. And then Laws here, I only play 2 because his main ability is he buffs these by 2k, and when he dies, my opponent discards a card. So usually if they want to, keep whatever cards they have left in hand, they don't want this to die. So these 3 cards together force my opponent to make really difficult decisions while also limiting their resources on what they can do next turn. Moving on to rest of the deck, I play 2 Izana. Izana is a really great card. I unfortunately underestimated this when I first was deck building. But let me show you the rest of the package to make sense of it. So Izana's ability is he can search for any job or card named Chocobo, and with the printing of the new Chocolat, he can search for essentially any type of card in the game. So he has a free card essentially because he searches for another Chocobo, and I like to play him turn 1 because he is a body that my opponent has to respect, but I also get another backup, or if I need it, a summon. And Chocolat's just a backup as a Chocobo, which is why I play her. But the best card with the Chocobo package, I would say, is Chocobo, because Chocobo allows me to bounce back to my hand a forward and then draw a card. Since this counts as a cast, what I typically like to do is play Chocobo. If I have Lock on the field, bounce him back. Because I played Chocobo, he does cost 1 less, and I get a card when I play him. And then play another card to play Lock again. So essentially, if you played Lock the previous turn, your opponent has lost cards in their hand. They can't tap their resources to pay for things, so they're overpaying. And then, you just bounce it back and play it again. Yeah, they are behind on so much CP that it's pretty hard to come back from that. But yeah, those 2 costs can just bring that back. So it's been working really well for me in my playtesting.
Back in the days, Chocobos, what's really funny, they are standard unit job titles. So not too much varieties to... There wasn't too much to work with unless you made that Chocobo Swarm deck.
Oh yes, yeah, that was a great deck. I think that still seeing some play. But yeah, Chocobos definitely, they still are relevant. So glad to see the Final Fantasy mascot still kicking. So the next thing in my deck, I played 3 of Zidane, pretty much a win staple at this point. So Zidane's ability is when he enters the field, you can look at 1 card in your opponent's hand and force them to discard it. So as you probably see in the theme of the deck, usually limiting your resources and keeping your stuff tapped. So forcing your opponent to discard one of their necessary cards to stay in the game makes Zidane really crippling. He's also another target to bounce with Chocobo, so you can, with Chocobo's flexibility allows you to choose whatever it is you need in that moment, whether you want to force them to discard a certain card or if you want them to dull and freeze. Yeah, but Zidane is just a pure staple and win, so 3 up for him definitely. I play 3 Fina. Fina is another win staple. I mostly play her just because she is a big body, and right now with the meta being very aggressive, people like to play typically small forwards. So she has 2 abilities. The first one is she can deal 5k to the opponent's board. So that can usually be a board wipe for if they're playing a lot of small dudes. Or another thing is she activates all characters. So essentially you could play her, activate all your characters, making her free, which then allows you to play Lock as this cost is reduced. She's also just a big body, so that's usually like a wall if I really need a wall in that moment. Yeah. Next card I play is Ash. Ash is a card I'm kind of on the fence about, but she's been working pretty well. So her main thing is whenever you cast 3 times in a turn, you get to draw a card. So since I have a lot of cards that are essentially free, like Riku and Izana, it's easy to just like play those two or any two cards and then play her and then draw. Essentially making her free, and then you also have a huge board presence because you just widen your board quickly. But yeah, and then once there are 6 or more characters on the field, she gains 2K and can't be targeted by abilities. So that forces your opponent to waste their removal on her just because they can't target her with abilities from characters. Then I play the 1 Y'shtola. I'm considering playing that at 2. Y'shtola really came in handy today. She can cancel auto abilities and summons. I had a match today where my opponent had to play Shantoto just to get rid of all the stuff on the field. They pitched their whole hand to do it because a lot of their resources were tapped. And I just, popped Shantoto, or sorry, popped Y'shtola and canceled their Shantoto. So definitely considering playing her at 2 as this deck has a soft weakness to, I guess, mass removal. But yeah, she's a win staple and she's really good. All right, so playing 3 Alexander. Alexander is there for removal. He can break a character of cost 4 or more. The main target for him is Neo Exdeath. Neo Exdeath is really impressive card and would pretty much shut down the stack. But Alexander helps to kill Neo Exdeath and at the same time any big forwards that my opponent plays. So usually the game plan is to keep everything tapped, and your opponent will typically pitch most of their hand to play that one big dude, and then you just play Alexander, pop it, and they have no cards in hand. So definitely I would say he's probably a staple for this deck as well. Alrighty, moving on to some more backups. Played 3 Norstelin, and I play 1 Althea. So Norstelin's main ability is it searches for 1 Crystal Chronicles backup. So right now Norstelin and also Yuke are my targets for Crystal Chronicles backups. Yuke allows me to flip over the top card of my deck until I find a wind or an earth card. So essentially it's like search in a sense. So I play it. And then Althea is actually one of my main cards in this deck. So Althea is great because she has 2 really game warping abilities. First one is when she enters the field, she activates 1 character. So if you activate a backup, she becomes essentially a 2-cost backup. Or you could use it if you attacked already and you want to be able to block again, you can play her and then activate it. And then her second ability is you can tap her and return her to your hand, and you can choose 1 character and return it to your hand as well. So there are a lot of really broken abilities with this. My favorite being Lock. If this is on the field, you can play Lock every single turn, and usually at that point that's just game because they're never going to have they're essentially only drawing 1 card per turn, and they also cannot use their backups anymore. So that's a really good ability or combo with them. So in certain instances, I like to bounce back Kate Sith and rip a card out of their hand and remove it from the game. I've had games where I just keep playing Kate Sith every single turn and removing cards from their hand from the game. Zidon's another great target. You can just force them to discard something every single turn. Or you can also just play Yazoo. If Kadash is on the field, you can just dull and freeze something every single turn. So Althea is really a linchpin to the deck. Because you play triple Norstelin, you essentially will always have her in your hand or on the field. So that's the reason I only play 1 of her. But definitely one of the main cards for the deck.
This is why she's foiled too.
Yes. She's also a princess, so I wanted to, give her the royal treatment. But yeah, it's really nice. Next I play 2 Eodolis. So Eodolis is a necessary card for this deck because Icewind historically has some of the lowest amount of recursion within FFTCG. So being able to bring back a card like Lock once it's, whether it's, I had to pitch it for another card, It's really nice. 3 is a little bit too much just because you can only play one since he's a character and not a standard unit. But definitely, I like to bring back Locke, or in some instances, I'll bring back Kadaj or Yazoo. Those are pretty much the 3 main targets that I bring back. But definitely, having him in the deck helps to cover for the weakness of the colors.
And having 2 is kind of like implying that you'll probably see 1 at least.
Yes.
And since it's the EX burst, yeah, it's actually great to be triggering.
Yeah, definitely. And then I also play 2 Miyu. Miyun's also one of the main cards of the deck. She also supports the goal of the deck and your boss card, Locke. So Miyun's ability is you can choose one character and return it to your hand and draw a card. Essentially the same as Chocobo, but as a backup. So by playing her, you're putting down a permanent resource for yourself, but you're also allowing a card that's on the field to return back to your hand and abuse its effect again. So typically, I like to play her, bounce Locke back. Locke costs 2 less now, and then because you drew a card, you have another card you can either play or pitch to play the Locke. And then she also is another combo piece for Althea because you can then break Althea, return them both to your hand, and then play Miyun again to bounce something back, play it, draw a card, and then Locke can really be about like 2 CP at that point, and you gain a lot of advantage. And if Ash is on the field, then you also get to draw a card. And then the last card I have is a personal tech choice. I'm playing 1 Scholar. So right now I know Samurais are really popular, and Samurais are kind of a hard matchup because most Samurais have Brave, so they don't tap. So cards like Kadaj, he doesn't really have a target to freeze because it's not dull. So Scholar allows me to force forwards to lose keywords such as Haste, First Strike, or Brave. So that forces Samurai players to make the decision on whether they want to attack right now or not, because it will be tapped if they do attack. So that's just a personal tech choice to help cover that matchup. But overall, yeah, this is the Icewind deck. I'm just trying to support Locke to oppress my opponent and slowing them down with the Remnant package and trying to do it as fast as I can with the support of the Final Fantasy VII crew. So, yeah.
Cool. Any matchups that were giving some problems?
Today I didn't have too many difficult matchups. I think one of my games, like I mentioned earlier, I had a player use Shantoto, I think 3 times on me, and that was really tough. But Shantoto is really costly, so the fact that they did it 3 times, to me, told me that I was doing my job of stopping them from using their resources. And eventually, they ran out of steam, and I was able to come back.
Well, so, any besides the bumping your Stola to 2, you were kind of iffy about the Ash. What would you take out to make a second initial Stola?
Yeah, so that's something I'm kind of on the fence about. Like I said, I'm thinking of possibly dropping Yuffie down to 1. In most of my games, I ended up pitching her. I guess in a sense she is a tech choice just in case I do need haste. But I think if I had the second Y'shtola today, like I could have negated another Shantoto, right? So I think being able to have that protection is more important than the haste in this build. But maybe that's just dependent on the matchup. But yeah, right now I'm currently looking at maybe dropping Yuffie down to 1.
Cool. Any shout outs you want to throw out while we still have you on?
Currently, no, not really, but definitely check out CSG Gaming.
All right. Thank you, Julian, for getting first place and going a really great explanation of your deck build and reasons why. Can't wait to see more from you and the other players that we have at our locals. Yeah. And for people watching, thank you for your time. Click the like, subscribe, and whatever our YouTubers tell you to do. And see you next time.
Bye.
Yeah, that's the